Hello, Gareth here, and we're going to do a lesson, an art lesson, and we're going to paint a snow scene, and we're going to learn about hard and soft edges. So first of all, let's practice painting some hard and soft edges. So I want to begin with a really watery mix. So here we go, that's very watery now, and I'm going to draw a line, well, like a mountain in the distance. There we go, like that. And we've got a hard edge here, and now here we're going to do a soft edge. So this is how you do a misty mountain. So you basically wet your brush, clean it, dab it on the rag, and use tissue if you want to get it super dry, and then underneath there we're just going to go across like that. Now the brush is slowly beginning to pick up paint, so we don't want to drag paint into the clean white areas, so we rinse again and then repeat. And there we go, a misty mountain. So now we're going to draw a hill with fir trees on it. So now we want a stronger tone. So by using just one colour, you can really see the differences in tone. So here we go. It's always good to have some rag like this, not rag, scrap paper, just to test. So yeah, I think that's okay. So we can draw a line down here. Now if this area is wet, be careful that your brush doesn't go into there, else you're going to get the paint spreading out in an uncontrollable way. You should wait for it to dry, but I'm a bit impatient, so I'm just going to get some tissue and just do that. I don't recommend, but it just helps us to do the next thing. So now I'm going to have this hill here and have to keep this wet. It's drying out very quickly, and then I'm just going to do things like this up and down with the brush just to suggest fir trees like that. There we go. That looked a bit too triangular just there, so we didn't want that. It didn't look natural. Okay, and that's it. You have to do this very quickly though, before the paint dries. So then I rinse my brush, dab it on the rag, and then quickly go into this. And it has dried very, very quickly. It has dried. So I'm just touching the edge. I'm not going too much into there, and that's actually quite nice. But you can, if you want, remove more of the paint. But just remember, as you're doing this, your brush is collecting paint, and you can end up dragging it into the white area. Like, let's have a look on the scrap paper. There, it's collected all that paint. So we don't want that on the brush. Rinse again, and then just one more time. I'm using tissue. If you want to make it super dry, use tissue, because if it is a bit wet, too wet, you'll get a bloom, a cauliflower bloom. So there we go. Now down here I'm going to do like a little trough or a little dip in the ground, and once again we're going to do hard and soft edges. So maybe here, and coming along here, we're going to have some dip in the ground. So the way we do that is, it's soft at the top. The top is soft, so I just wet the paper here. I can see it glistening, so that tells me where the water is. And then I get some mix and then there we go. And if you can get this like dry brush effect, then good for you. That's nice. And like that. And maybe that's enough there. And then maybe over here, one more. So as you can see, snow scenes are wonderful for painting hard and soft edges. There we go, a bit more. And so now we leave that to dry. I mean, one thing I could do is, I think there's just a little bit of paint on the brush. I'll just use my scrap paper to check. Yeah, there's a tiny bit. We can go across here just to suggest a little bit of some ground. Just a suggestion. So this is very delicate work, but if you're using your scrap paper, you should be able to get a feeling. Oh, and one more thing, wanted to do some blades of grass. So I rinse the brush, dry it with my tissue, and now here I'm going to go up like that. 1, 2, 3, and maybe one more. You have to be so careful not to do too many of these. A few looks beautiful, but a lot looks quite ugly. And then we're going to have some shadows. That's too thick. Well, I softened it a bit. So you have to make sure the hairs are together. The hairs on the brush are together. So let's try again. A little better. Yeah. So I should have told you this before. I've already decided that my sun is coming from over here, from this area, coming down. So my shadows are going down in this direction. So one student was asking about her objects floating, and one reason your objects will float is if you don't have shadows. So shadows are super important. Even if you're painting a snow scene and there are no shadows, add shadows, because it will help make it look like the objects are attached to the ground. So let's leave that to dry. So now we're going to paint a fir tree. So there are many kinds of fir trees. So the one I'm going to show you is this one. Well, there's two attempts. So let's have a go, shall we? So I'm using my hate brush, and we have basically a line coming down like this, and then the top bit, it's really just dabbing like that, and then just going to make this mix a little bit thicker. You have like a sweeping stroke coming across like this, and it tends at the end to kind of bush out like that. I've spent a long time painting fir trees, so I think I've got better at painting them, but I still find them difficult. So if you find painting fir trees difficult, please don't think you haven't got any painting ability. Please trust me when I say that painting trees is very difficult. Very difficult. I've even gone a bit wrong there. I've made the trunk a little bit too thick. Well, maybe it's okay, but as I'm saying, painting trees is very, very difficult. It takes a long time. Last year I just painted fir trees again and again and again, and I think part of the trick is, it's really very obvious. You've got to find one fir tree that you like, one shape that you really like, have a drawing of it, you know, like get a picture, you know, Google Images, something like that, or take a photograph of a beautiful fir tree, or look through your photos for a fir tree, maybe that's the better way, and then just practice painting it again and again and again until you crack it. Because if you're trying to do it from your memory or from your head, that's difficult to begin with, and if you haven't really looked at the real version, then it's really going to be difficult. Of course, eventually with time you'll be able to paint it from memory, because you'll just have learned by painting it again and again and again. So for example, people and cars and maybe even boats, I can paint now just from my imagination and paint them fairly well. But it really is important to look at the real versions and practice painting them and getting them right. So that's a bit crooked, and you do have these little branches like that. So maybe I'll paint just one more here. So the reason why I'm doing this is scrap paper, by the way. This is sketchbook, no, multimedia paper. It's half the price or even cheaper than watercolor paper, and it works really, really well. I've done finished paintings on this kind of paper, and this tree looks a bit drunk. It's leaning to one side. So maybe it's been blown to one side by the wind. Let's make a story. But yeah, this paper is very, very cheap. I seriously recommend that you get some multimedia paper and do a lot of your work on that. If you hate it and you've got the money, then just get watercolor paper. But to be honest, I always find painting on watercolor paper inhibits me a bit, and I just can't paint so well, and that's after 20 years, which is it's a bit sad, really, right? I mean, I can still do good paintings on watercolor paper, but sometimes on this kind of paper I do some fantastic stuff because I'm not so worried, not so inhibited, because I know this paper is really cheap. So there you go, just like that. And then the important thing is to have a shadow. So this is going to be a little bit more watery, and there we go. This is just practice, so I'm not too bothered, but you have to think about the angle. So if the sun's coming this direction, then maybe we're going to get a few little lines going across like that. That's it, really, like that. And this one, oh, I think this one doesn't look quite that nice. Maybe here we can do a little bit of there we go, and then a branch there. Looks a bit better. Little by little the more you paint them, you slowly get a feeling for, you know, a good looking fir tree. A good looking fir tree. Yeah. And obviously the sun's now about here, coming down here, and that actually looks quite nice and better than that shadow. Whoops, maybe it's in a bit of a dip. There we go. Finished. So please have a go practicing to paint this fir tree, and then we're going to paint this in the final picture that we already began. Okay, so here we go. This is what we painted before. I think it looks pretty fantastic. And then we're going to paint one of these trees. Now, I don't know about you, but normally when I start painting on the final painting, I get a little bit inhibited, and it doesn't always work so well, but we'll just do our best. So I was going to paint the tree here, but maybe here might be better, because our lines seem to be guiding the eye here. Like these blades of grass are pointing this way, these mountain ridges are pointing this way, so maybe this would be the best place for a focal point. So get my mix right, and before I start painting this tree, I want it slightly thick, and use my rag so that it's not too watery. I need to really think about how high is this going to be. You don't want it here, because look how big these blades of grass are. If the tree's here, this is going to be one big tree. Yeah, it's a bit scary. So maybe it's going to begin about here, and it's going to go up to about there, and move it across a bit to about here. Yeah, so as you can see, this whole composition has really just been made up in my head. So here we go. So I decided about there. Maybe a little bit higher. And that was the hardest bit. Trying not to have too much water on my brush. And then just tiny dabs at the top here. Often when you do these first strokes, it often feels like, oh no, it's wrong. You really need a lot of faith in watercolor painting. And then here we go. It's pushing out a bit. And then on the other side, like that. And you need to try and make these gaps, the difference between the gaps, irregular, because then it's going to look natural. If you make these things equal distance, they almost look equal distance, but not quite. But if you do that, and there is a tendency in just its human nature to make things correct distance between one another, if that makes sense, and to balance things, and which is very interesting, but it looks unnatural, and so you really have to resist that tendency and have irregular things. Irregular, so this is a bit longer than this one, so you have to kind of train to untrain yourself sometimes. And then a little tiny one there, and that's quite nice. Maybe I should have made it a little bit taller, but that's pretty nice. I'm just doing little dabs here. And there we go. and then a bit watery, and we've got shadows here. I might need to make them a bit stronger, so we have to think the higher up an object is, the more the shadow is going to go like this, the further in the distance. So this shadow is going to be about here. Let's see, there we go. And because it's quite a sharp angle, these bits are not really going to show that much, so I'm just going to dab. And there we go. I think that actually works very, very well. And then here, do shadows for these and try and keep them in line. So I think they're a bit strong, so I can get some tissue paper and dab them, just soften them a bit, and there we go. So there we go, finished. So please have a go and let me know how you get on. So just an important point here, if you look at my tones, you can see, thank goodness, that they're working really well. Look at that. That tone is definitely the lightest because it's got more water in it. And this is darker, and this is the darkest of all. So that's why we only use one colour at the moment, so that you get this tone right. Because even if we'd done this in colour and the colours were beautiful, if these tones were wrong, the painting just isn't going to work. And you can see the kind of depth. The only place where it doesn't get stronger in tone is here with these shadows, because these shadows are delicate shadows. Here anyway. But I made these a little bit darker, but that seems to work. But this thing is really, really important. So very light, then, well, light tone, then medium tone, and then very strong tone. So it's very important to get that. Okay, please have a go and happy painting.